I didn't think much about going to that pawn shop that night. I had this old gold ring that my grandfather left me, a bulky thing with a strange, unrecognizable emblem on it. It had been sitting in a drawer for years, and I figured I could use the extra cash. Pawn shops are always open late, and the one near my apartment, Tom's Trading Post, kept its neon open sign glowing until midnight. It was already past 10 p.m. when I stepped out into the cool night air, clutching the ring in my pocket. I thought I'd be in and out in 5 minutes, just a quick sale, no hassle. But that shop, I still get chills thinking about what I saw in there. The moment I opened the door, a little bell jingled, and the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was inside. Not just nobody's here quiet, it felt like the air was thick with silence, almost like the shop had been waiting for me. Shelves of clutter lined the walls, old TVs, rusty tools, antique clocks ticking slightly out of sync. Behind the glass counter stood the owner, a skinny man in his 60s with sunken eyes and a thin mustache. His clothes looked a little too big for him, like he'd lost weight recently. He gave me a strange grin the second I walked in, as if he knew I'd show up. "You looking to sell?" he asked, his voice smooth and quiet, like he didn't want to disturb the silence in the room. "Yeah, I've got an old ring," I replied, pulling it from my pocket and setting it on the glass counter. The man leaned in closer, adjusting a pair of round glasses on his nose. He studied the ring for a long moment, then looked up at me with that same grin. "Interesting piece," he whispered. "Tell you what, why don't I show you something special? Maybe we can work out a trade instead." I hesitated. A trade? That wasn't what I had in mind, but curiosity got the better of me. "Sure, I guess," I muttered, unsure what else to say. The owner's grin widened. He slowly stepped from behind the counter and gestured for me to follow him toward the back of the store. "Come on, you'll like this," he said softly, his voice still barely above a whisper. The farther back we went, the darker it became. The dim lighting from the front of the shop barely reached the cramped hallway that led to the rear rooms. Something about it felt off. The walls were lined with mismatched frames, old posters, and bizarre trinkets, things that looked like they belonged in a hoarder's basement, not a store. The owner stopped in front of a heavy black door. It had no sign, no handle, just a keyhole. He produced a small brass key from his pocket, and with a soft click, the door swung open. "After you," he whispered, motioning me inside. The room beyond was nothing like the front of the shop. It was dimly lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb, casting long shadows across rows of glass display cases. And inside those cases, I saw things I wish I could forget. The first case I glanced at held a collection of teeth. Not old dentures or gold fillings, but single human teeth, each one different from the rest. Some were cracked, others perfectly white. A few had strange carvings etched into them, symbols that made my skin crawl. In the next case, I saw dolls, but not ordinary ones. These looked handmade, stitched together with rough fabric, bits of hair, and scraps of leather. Their eyes, oh man, their eyes, were made from what looked like small, cloudy marbles. Some of the dolls had little needles stuck in them, arranged in deliberate patterns. "Like what you see?" the owner whispered, standing too close behind me now. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck, cold and damp. I forced myself to move farther down the row, though my legs felt heavy, like my body was begging me to leave. In the next case, I saw something made my stomach turn. Jars filled with preserved things. At first, I thought they were just animals, frogs, lizards, that sort of thing. But the longer I looked, the more I realized some of those things weren't quite animals. One jar held what looked like the shriveled hand of a baby, the fingers curled tightly into a fist. Another contained something that resembled an eye, only it was twice the size of a normal eye and had no pupil, just a milky white surface staring blankly through the glass. I took a step back, my heart racing. "What is all this?" I whispered, my voice shaky. The owner smiled, his teeth yellowed and sharp. "Curiosities," he said. "Everything here has a story and a price." I wanted to leave. I needed to leave, but he wasn't done showing me his collection. He grabbed my arm lightly, but it was enough to make me freeze in place. "You haven't seen the best part yet," he whispered, guiding me toward the far corner of the room. There, sitting on a wooden pedestal under a glass dome, was an old, cracked mirror. It was no bigger than a dinner plate, and the surface was smeared with something that looked like dried blood. "Look into it," the owner whispered. I didn't want to. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around and run, but something about the way he said it made me feel like I didn't have a choice. I leaned in slightly, just enough to catch my reflection, and I swear, for a split second I saw someone else's face staring back at me. It wasn't my face. It looked like me, but the eyes were wrong. Too wide, too dark, like they belonged to someone, or something else. And just before I pulled away, I saw the reflection grin at me, revealing teeth that were jagged and black. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over one of the cases. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might explode. "I think I'll just take my ring back," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. The owner tilted his head slightly, as if considering my request. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "You've seen so much. Wouldn't you like to know more?" "No," I said, louder than I intended. "I just want my ring." He gave me that same eerie grin and pulled the ring from his pocket, holding it out to me between two fingers. I snatched it from his hand, trying not to touch him any more than I had to. Without another word, I turned and bolted toward the door. My footsteps echoed through the dark hallway, and I swear I heard the owner chuckling softly behind me as I ran. The bell above the front door jingled as I burst out into the night, gasping for air. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block. When I finally dared to look back, the neon open sign was still glowing faintly in the window, like nothing had ever happened. I never went back to that pawn shop. I never even walked down that street again. And every time I think about that night, I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if I'd stayed just a little longer?